sometimes being embracing weakness. You know, for an alpha male, it's very hard.
Yes.
Adapting weak because I'm the best, right? I'm the best in here, just like a lion.
What is wealth? How do you define wealth? There's a 4-quadrant of family wealth that I like to start with as a structure in the space of wealth management. I would actually argue that, being a female is preferential.
好，大家好，我哋有新一集嘅 Wise Struggle。OK， 咁我哋上集咧好開心邀請到 Angel 上嚟啦，即係講下即係其實點樣我哋可以面對到即係當我哋面對到問題啊，或者我哋個人成長上邊應該係點樣去做啦。咁但係咧其實我哋嘅 conversation 上邊咧傾下咧就發覺，喂有一樣嘢我都真係好想咧去俾聽眾更加深入去接觸嘅，就係即係作為一個成功嘅女士。真嘅成功嘅女士，其實點樣可以俾到我哋一班女聽眾咧？就係而家面試我哋遇到一個咁大嘅競爭嘅情況下啦，其實點樣去面對咧？點樣去即係喺呢一個嘅環境下邊脫穎而出咧？咁樣咁所以即係我哋希望今次我哋呢一個 episode 咯，我哋可以 deep dive in 多啲啦，係咪啊？嗱 Angel。反而咧講點樣去脫穎而出之前咧，我都相信聽眾都好想知嘅就係你點樣去 reach 你今時今日呢一個 position
I think I'll combine my experience with, maybe some of the pointers that I could offer for female professionals to think about. I think first and foremost, it is very important for us to recognize that after all, I was trained as a financial professional. We were talking about basically female in the financial sector, or especially now, particularly female in a wealth management sector. And I do think, I would wonder, that female in other sectors would inevitably also, be a little bit different. So for me, when I was younger in my career, I've mentioned that I really didn't think gender was that much of a determining point. It really comes down to, what is your fundamental skills and knowledge, right? And that's genderless, right? In Chinese, we call 蹲马步, right? So as a professional, as a younger professional, without thinking about your gender, and also we're not talking about the function that you're in, because if you're an investment person, if you're, a back office person, if you're a front office person, of course, the nature of that job would probably mean differently for different genders. But no matter what, 该蹲的马步就是要蹲, right? You have to be responsible in equipping yourself sufficiently. As that continued to grow, then, let's say in the space of wealth management, I would actually argue that, being a female is preferential, and sure, do I not take advantage of my lady charm sometimes? In a sense that, maybe in the space of wealth management, and if we're talking about frontline client facing, then we talk about how can we be of help? How can we be a little bit more understanding? How could we actually be very detail oriented? Let's face it, that's actually sort of very much in character for female, maybe compared to male anyway, right? Yes. So in this case, I have benefited tremendously actually by my gender, not gonna lie about it. Probably benefited a little bit, like I don't look horrible. Let's face it, so
you look pretty.
Thank you. You're too sweet. But again, do you have to always come back and think, this is because of gender? Or are we literally just talking about like, what are the assets, right? So again, it comes back to what are the assets that I could use? What are the assets that I could grow? And how do we use that assets in the best scenario in conjunction with the situation that I face, right? So this is sort of how I approach it, first and foremost as a professional. I think another thing though, that is now becoming a lot more interesting for a female to think about is as you grow in your career, how do you think about being a female in an executive environment? How do you grow into a leadership? Then all of a sudden, I think that dimension actually becomes very different. So as I started to put myself in the environment of growing into a leadership, I actually often find myself making some sort of a comment where I'm more of a guy than all of my guys. So if I were to unpack that statement, I do realize
你比男人更男人。
真係咯，比男仔更男仔啦。And I realize that indeed, it really comes back to the qualities that are specifically required for a certain position. And that position of leadership usually requires a lot more risk-taking, a lot more resilience to take on responsibilities. It probably also requires a certain level of boldness, which sometimes doesn't always look like the gentleness that a female character presents, right? It actually also requires a lot more. And this is where I would say it takes practice. This is where I do feel like I was consciously moving out of myself, probably as a girl, in order to be more responsible as a leader, which is really forcing yourself to think and analyze critically and rationally, despite what time of the month it is, despite what your emotional roller coaster is going through with different things that might happen in your life, particularly if you start having families, right? There's a lot more expectation and inclination, actually, as a female, when you start thinking about your obligations and your passion, actually, to be a nurturing person for your family, right? Sometimes it does require resisting that inclination and creating almost like a bubble for yourself, in order to think critically through situations and be fair, as a leader. Yeah. So I do think that, these characteristics is important for us to nurture, but at the same time, and this is the part that I feel like I learned from Master as well, we talk about how naturally female, from a behavioral patterns perspective, female do tend to manage ourselves ahead of time.
Yes.
So we always, typical business school kind of conversations, right? Where it comes to negotiating for salaries, negotiating for promotion, things like that. Female usually think inwardly first, interactively first, and say, do I qualify for this? And we tend to be a lot more risk averse and a lot more conservative, so we're going to say, I'm, if I could do 100%, then I'm going to say that I could do 70%. Whereas for guys, it's usually the reverse. And that has implication to how a guy position itself, himself, and how a guy negotiate for everything, right? So
we like to bluff.
And I would say it's a skill and it's a behavioral pattern we just have to recognize, right? So in this case, it actually also does require overcorrecting. It's a conscious overcorrecting on the part of a female to say, well, like I know I could do 100% instead of me keep managing myself down, and also realizing this is something that really does kind of take time, or sometimes someone just have to whack you over your head or tell you that by keep managing yourself down, it is not just a disservice to yourself, but it's a disservice actually to your job and to your team potentially, and to, your ecosystem, your stakeholders, right? By you thinking belittle too much of yourself, right? So I think, as I grew in career and more people, start sharing about that, and I come to realize that, sometimes if I discount too much of myself, and if I'm sometimes at a negotiating table, for example, that initial discount really does not help, with getting the best result for everybody, So I learned that in order for me to be responsible at my job, irrespective of whether I'm a girl or guy, I need to, I need to overcorrect. And in that process, another thing that, females in business school, we always talk about is like, how do you build coalition? And this is really something that I've also learned through the course of my career. First of all, to always build coalition with other female, let's face it, doesn't always work. It just doesn't always work. We also have to recognize, I guess, when people talk about, the female inclination of cat fights, for any reason whatsoever, it does happen, right? So in this case, actually, when I think about correlation, it's really just also based on the job nature, and it's genderless, or it's irrespective of gender. But I do need to be a lot more mindful, almost in the same spirit as building that personal board of advisors, the same idea. But in this case, being mindful of selecting the coalition that is relevant to the space that I'm operating in at that time, in order to champion for me, in order to help me, in order to cover my weakness, because everybody has some, right? So that I could, so that I'm not competing on my own. So I think all of that combined really helps a lot for a female to feel stronger. And makes it easier for us to overcorrect.
I like how you mentioned this, how to champion, how to help me, and how to cover my weakness. Like here is a very good flow of thinking already. Every time it's like, because I was keep thinking, okay, be mindful. When we mentioned be mindful, it's like, okay, be mindful how, but you just mentioned it. So always think, how can I champion the situation up ahead? But also do I able to ask for help that I could help me to get through? But also, am I covering the weakness that I have? Or maybe you meant by maybe not covering, but also improved, right?
Yes, very much so.
I think this is constantly, you got to start thinking about it. But when you mentioned about being a female leader, one thing I've noticed in my work, in my nature of work, actually right now, the percentage of leadership is actually kind of shifted. It used to be maybe 10 or 20 years ago, used to be male adopt like the leadership role. Yeah. But now, my nature of work, especially in insurance, there's a lot of leaders, mentoring a lot of agents and or maybe new leaders coming up. It's now been shifted. It's more like 60% actually are female than
exactly.
male. And when I look at, because every year we have award presentations, AIA award, those top financial leaders and all that. The top 5, actually right now, the top 1 or 2 are actually female.
Yes. Girl power.
Yeah, girl power. Girl is on fire, But one thing I've really noticed is women tended to be, I wouldn't say they're simple, but they more get works done and they're more focused to get things done. Just like you said, they think ahead. So in your work, do you have that same, ratio, like more women's coming out? And you have mentioned, like there's a lot of women you got to work with, and it's kind of not easy along. But how do you get around that also?
So first things first. So exactly to your point, and by now I do think that there's enough statistics and various kind of researches, that business schools actually also talks about, of women. There's probably even there's a term that's basically a women alpha. Yeah. So whether it be the women participation on board level, which is very important, because if you think about it, that's actually setting direction of organizations or corporates. And then also women executives and also women, professionals, right? Another thing that I found that are starting to trend recently is even women as investment managers, which is, again, going back to that women alpha. And there is studies now that says, if you have a female as an investment manager, they tend to look at company really on the medium to longer term. They potentially also tend to be, more dedicated, more concentrated for some reason, so the ability, I suppose, to be able to resist, more focus, and to be able to resist volatilities or cut out noise in the market seems to also be, quite obvious in women investment managers. The nurturing aspect of women in a context of investment manager sometimes translate into how the women investor will then look at the companies and then look at evidence of nurturing. What does that mean? That's probably ESG. That's probably sustainability. That's at the very least actually how they will be able to also evaluate better how the corporate on the medium to longer term engage holistically on their stakeholder management, right? So all of that is born out of something very characteristics of women, I suppose. So I'm very happy that now the tide has shifted a little bit. What is also interesting is the diverse spectrum, I suppose, of these characteristics that are exhibited by the gender. On the one hand, we talk about how it's been how women are able to be quite focused, dedicated, I suppose. Even things like carrying a massive balloon, right, in your body for 9 months, right, speaks to a biological makeup of potentially being a lot more resilient and dedicated, right? But at the same time, also the detail-orientedness, or the holistic ability to look at broad, dimensions, which then speaks to the stakeholder relationships, right? So the combination of these two aspects coming together in a female personality is indeed actually underlying, good leadership, I suppose, right? So, but here's the thing, right? So if we now start drawing all of that observations, then we should ask ourselves, does it mean that, this only happens in women, right? And it shouldn't. Right? Because, we could always train ourselves, just like how women, or for me personally, right? How I have to at one point train myself to be a lot more rational, a lot less emotional, right? Men could also train oneself to be a lot more sustainable.
Yes.
And also maybe be a little bit more gentle, which means that your tactical ability to maneuver within relationships could also be further garnered, right?
Yes.
So I do think that it's not about women versus men. It's just about let's pull out, right?
Definitely, it's not about versus.
Exactly, yeah. But it's just pulling out all of these characteristics and cultivating those in us.
Yes.
Going back to sort of the gender competition. There's probably something very innate to the gender that compares. And realistically, to think about that changing is pointless. However, I do think that, what I've seen in the workplace between female dynamics is that of giving back. So I do think that or I do see that it happens a lot more when you have women growing up and blossoming, throughout that career development, and again, acting out of that contentment or acting out of access, appreciating, the necessary challenges that a female has to go through. And then the natural nurturing aspect of a woman would actually naturally put us in a position where I do think that we tend to make more natural mentors to younger women. So paying it forward. So in this case, a lot of my team now, team members are female. They are younger female. And then, or if there are other females that are of similar career development level, usually we end up being in different capacities, different functional capacity. Then we each are are specialized in our lane, but we appreciate, everything that we've worked to develop, and we become a very good coalition, that support each other. Yeah.
So 即係我覺得 Angel 頭先你講咧，我覺得即係而家女性越嚟越叻啦，係咪？頭先你哋都講咗多一樣嘢，就係 alpha female 啦，係咪？即係 traditionally alpha male is male, right? Like very dominating and all stuff. But like you said, I don't think it's a competition. I think it's both gender has to start embracing the new world that is changing. That we both have to take each other the best quality.
Absolutely.
And how can we adapt it to ourselves?
Yes.
It's actually, especially for me. My kind of work, my line of work is more, a lot of people saying it's more in sales, but I think so. It's more about people. And if I'm constantly being an alpha male, I think it's really hard to work with people, because being an alpha male, that's actually kind of a typical characteristic, right? I don't think everybody likes, So for me, I got to start changing as well. I got to start adapting and sometimes embracing weakness. For an alpha male, it's very hard.
Yes.
Adapting weak because I'm the best, right? I'm the best in here, just like a lion. To have all the female lion around him, he has to fight against the other male lion, right? To win it and fight over it, and then you have the female lions following you. But I think now it's not about like winning. It's more about am I accepting the weakness? Am I accepting to lose?
Yes.
And having that caring actually is strength.
Very much so.
Rather than a weakness.
Yes.
But a lot of males seeing caring actually as a weakness, right? But I think we have to adapt. We have to start changing. Be more careful. Be more mindful. Be more willing to make the first step. And I think one very lame oversight, like put yourself in somebody's shoes. But I find a lot of alpha male doesn't put themselves in other shoes.
Do that. Yeah.
They want people to put in their shoes.
Yes.
But to be honest, to be a great leader, I think really you got to put yourself in somebody's shoes and have that care and like you said, what can I be benefits? What can I serve to that person's to? Then both can grow.
Very much so.
Yeah. But you just mentioned you are working with a lot of young ladies now. So how's that relationship?
It's actually great. So first and foremost, because of the different stage of the learning curve, I suppose, or career development, I really kind of feel like I'm already at a stage where I'm thinking about giving back. I'm very, I'm very much driven by paying it forward. I'm very much driven by, how can I help, right? When I look back at earlier part of my career, it's not always, roses and, easy times, right? So a lot of time, my motivation is thinking about how can I offer to other colleagues, particularly younger colleagues, male or female alike, actually, some pockets of learnings that I wish when I was younger in my career, someone else would have been there and speak more prominently into my consciousness, to remind me. I really think that by now, me personally is primarily driven by that motivation. And then once you're in that position of, I'm helping you, or I'm trying to help you, but also recognizing that some of these younger generation, they're different, right? They're different. They're exposed to a totally separate set of maybe information and challenges and environments, and they could also be the people that cover my weak side. Right. So I could also glean a lot of learnings and wisdom from them. Right. So having that interaction of, giving and taking, learning and growing, that actually sets, I think that puts a level of trust, first and foremost, that really helps people working together, right? So extremely helpful. Something else I actually wanted to say, when we're analyzing personality or characteristics types, I recently learned about like the 3-person egos. So at any given point in time, a person could be a parent, a person could be a child, a person could be an adult.
Yes.
Right. But you're not always a parent. You're not always, or it's probably not good that you're always a parent. You're always a child. You're always an adult, right? So recognizing that, the changing of roles, because of the situation that you're in, for example, or because you're allowing yourself to actually have that diversity, so that it actually also challenges you and sort of work how you approach things differently. Effectively is diversification, if you think about it, right? So this is diversification of your approach and diversification of your personal ego. And that diversification, just much the same way as investment, is always good. Yeah.
So I want to ask you, so now you're in wealth management business, right?
Yeah.
So does females see the economics differently, or see finance differently, or wealth differently than male?
I think when it comes to finance or financial environment or economics environment, I do think that it's quite academic.
Okay.
There's a level, there should probably be more level of absolute than relatives because of gender. However, I suppose female might relate to the concept of wealth maybe a little bit differently. Simply because of the historical and maybe the cultural setting of where female are usually placed within the family. What do I mean by that? These days, if we're talking about family offices, one of the first things that we talk about is wealth and wealth succession, right? But I really, do think that it's very important for people to really ask themselves, what is wealth? How do you define wealth? And these days, I often, there's a 4-quadrant of family wealth that I like to start with as a structure. So first of all, let's still think about not just the personal, but a family, for example, right? So the family wealth, as in your financial assets or different assets, 家产, right? And then your family business, if you have a business, right? 家业, right? Which, in Asia is still very common.
Yes.
And probably we're talking about first gen, second gen, right? 创一, 创二, generation of these family businesses, which also has implication in terms of what that business might look like. Chances are you're probably still talking about at least the upward sloping trajectory as opposed to completely stagnant or coming down. However, because of the changing of environment and economics, and the interest rate cycle and whatever, that's actually starting to, sort of tip out potentially. And then the 3rd quadrant is 家人, of course, right? At the end of the day. And the final quadrant is 家风. So, that speaks to sort of the social capital, the philosophy of the families and things like that. Now, if I start with these 4, and you put a female lens to it, probably more likely the female will feel a lot more tangible and relational to 家人家风, right? Whereas the male potentially, particularly Asian cases, right? If we're talking about a lot of the 创一 being still your good old-fashioned male founder, then the male probably would first say 家产家业 or 家业 then 家产, right? Yeah. So immediately there's that difference, right? And because they care about it slightly differently with respect to the quadrants of wealth, they're going to take different approach to deal with, to sustain, if not grow, and continue that wealth. right? So you will have more female that, really care about how do I cultivate my people. And then you'll see a lot more, even the rising generation, if they're female, they're going to be a little bit more leaning towards the philanthropy, the impact portion of things, which is the social capital of that families. Whereas the guys are still, I wanted to do investment. I wanted to grow my business. I wanted to set up more startups and things like that. Right?
Yeah.
So, So I always think that, especially now, where it pertains to wealth management as a profession, I actually think that it's very important for us to put some proper structure, right, of thinking through some of these, what seems to be very basic definition, but we have to think it through first.
Wow. I mean, when you put it this way, actually, it's inspire me on how, actually the same on how running a team, like for my work.
Yes.
When you talk about women actually care more into 家人 and 家风.
Right.
So when they join a team or when they choose the line of work, they're more about the people and the culture. Look at
the leader. Yeah, exactly.
And for male, it's more about the career path, the payout or the result.
Yes.
Wow. Actually, it actually helps a lot of us on how we work with female and male as well. And when we approach them, when we talk to them, what should we start with first?
Yes. Same way as you probably when you're thinking about even approaching your clients.
Yes.
Right? If you're talking with the patriarch versus the matriarch, or even the rising gen female or the rising gen male. I'm not saying that it's always like that, right? But this is it is kind of statistics in a way, right? So understanding that that tendency is still, makes our job probably a lot more effective sometimes.
Well, a lot more effective, especially insurance, right? So I remember when I met you for the first time, we were talking about your personal insurance, and I don't have to mention a lot. Like you're like, I know that's something I need to care for. I have to be mindful of. I'll be responsible for myself. So insurance is a must. It's I just need to share with you and how do we work out what's the sum assured amount and what's the premium. Does it fit your budget? And then we just go ahead.
Exactly.
But when it comes to a male, I know it's like, if I'm talking about all this, they were like, I don't see the point, Ben. So just tell me how much I'm investing in and how much I'm getting a return. The chances of me dying, the chances of me getting claimed, really? I don't see a point. I'm single. I don't need it. And also when I come with a couple, it's the same. I remember I have a friend. He kept asking me, Ben, why do I need insurance? But the wife is, we need insurance.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
It's also remind me now when I work too. And it's I get a lot more business when I talk to female. They are willing to pay more, because they've, actually more, focus. I wouldn't say focus. They more tends to care about the family itself when things get cold or when things happen. But for male, they're always thinking that I'm capable. I can handle that. I have money. I don't need that. And they always think is, I don't want to waste the money. I don't want to let your insurance company to have make money. Have that money. It's like, I don't want you to make money off me. But for female, it's like, it's okay. You're going to make money. We understand. But I just want to know when things happen, am I covered? It's very, very different. Yeah.
Very much so.
Wow. Very, very much so. So tell me, so now with all this experience and everything, so do you have a next step, like a new goal or something that you're planning ahead to do?
Oh, that's very big. But
I know it's big. I know that this is also not what we are lining up to ask, but I'm very curious.
I would say this. I felt like I felt like a personal calling had been revealed over time. As my professional career unfold or progress, that more and more I care a lot about the rising generation being properly equipped and empowered and informed to be able to be responsible. And that inclination, you could say that it actually applies to, all sort of social segmentations indeed. So you take that and then you couple with, my cumulative career experiences, which is in finance, or in asset management, and later on sort of transitioning into wealth management, so these two things combined, caring for the next generation or rising generation and how they're equipped, and utilizing my expertise accumulated from wealth management kind of equals to working with ultra high net worth and high net worth, working with well-to-do family rising gen, right? And my thesis is actually quite simple, which is at the end of the day, those that are currently very rich in resource, not just in financial resource, but all of that wealth quadrant that we're talking about, if as they continue to grow, meaning changing of generations and new people come up and all that, if they can continue to be properly stewarded, then there's a long-term, long tail effect to the rest of us, to their society, to not just their businesses, not just the employees, not just their industries, but this is, but the locale that they operate in, the overall, society, and by extension, the world. It sounds so freaking corny. If I were to say, if I get rich kids right, we save the world a certain way. But it's true, right? So I actually really do think that that's my calling. And it doesn't matter what position that I'm in, whether it be, the Korean Academy for Wealth Legacy, or I'm in some sort of educational capacity, or even I'm in a non-profit, non-government organization, like a philanthropy kind of capacity. The focus is the same, and does that mean that, Angel gets to educate all of these younger generation? Absolutely not. It's about how I could then again build coalition. I could then work with other thought leaders, other experts representing different pillars of capacities that we think are very important to equip these rising gens, whether it be the capacity to run businesses, be a good manager, or the capacity of just not squander their money away, be a decent investor, right? Or even just simple capacity of being able to communicate as a person, to their upper gen, to their peers, in the family, or to the larger ecosystem, and their employees that will work for them, the government environment, right? The social environment that they're going to operate in. None of that is automatic. We have to remember. Doesn't mean that these families, have very successful businesses and families are so rich in their resources that the rising generation automatically will be good in all these areas, right? So it is really of long-term economic and humanity benefit for us to come together, and soul and help, and advise into these rising generation. Because of my time in Singapore, at one point, sometimes we hear Malay, right? I always love a term in Malay. It takes the whole kampong. So basically, it takes the whole village to raise a kid.
Yes.
Right? You have that in English, you have that in Chinese as well. It's the same idea actually with extremely high, ultra high families as well. So however I could facilitate, an environment or creating a community by working and bringing together other like-minded people that see the importance of sowing into the rising gen, I'll just continue to do it.
Wow. 有一樣嘢咧，可能大家都唔知啦。其實咧 ，Angel 咧喺through 我自己嘅個工作上邊嘅 journey， 其實 Angel 都幫咗我好多，即係佢亦都俾咗好多個唔同嘅 opportunity。頭先佢話咧，佢 pay forward 啦，即係其實我覺得我都備受恩惠嘅。點解咧？佢亦都曾經佢俾過一個好好嘅 opportunity 我啦，即係同佢一齊喺一個嘅非牟利慈善團體啊，即係去教一班國際學校嘅學生啦，係咪啊？咩叫做wealth management 啦，係啦，咁啊俾個機會我可以接觸原來 younger generations 佢哋即係點樣去睇現時佢哋嘅 career 啦，係咪？佢幫佢哋點樣即係畢業之後啦，應該揀啲咩科目啦，甚至喺我自己嘅工作上邊，即係我點樣去尋求即係下一個嘅目標。或者點去做樣嘢，咁頭先我都所講啦，即係佢竟然係用佢抽佢寶貴嘅時間，我哋係 through 個 coffee 上邊，佢好快就喺張廁紙上邊咧就已經寫我應該點做，點樣點做，甚至教我原來乜嘢叫 family office， 乜嘢叫 high net worth， 咩叫 ultra high net worth， 做呢件事點樣去 plan out， 即係其實。我就已經俾佢感受到咧，佢點樣去幫助我。咁當然啦，我亦都學識點樣去幫助我身邊嘅人啦，甚至即係而家我同一班朋友啦一齊去 set up 咗一個 family office 啦，係咪？甚至我而家夠膽去諗就係、你令到我夠膽去諗就係我點樣可以 change insurance 呢一樣嘢咧？係咪淨係作為一個 insurance advisor 就夠，而定係我可以真到成為一個 family office 嘅 advisor，真係俾一個 total solution 之下，而唔係淨係識 sell產品，而係真係 sell solution 咧。咁啊 ，Angel 希望咧，即係喺呢一度啦，我代表大家啦，亦都代表我自己啦。希望即係你可以揾到你嘅下一個嘅目標，更加可以做大啲啦，更加可以幫到更加唔同嘅人啦。甚至我希望你嚟緊嘅將來啦，更加開心啲啦，幸福啦，係咪啊？揾到下一個 location 啦，係咪啊？希望你繼續留喺香港嘅，希望係啦。咁啊，亦都多謝咁多位咁啊收聽我哋 Wise Struggle 嗱。其實我哋 Wise Struggle 我哋呢個節目咧，希望真嘅，即係希望我哋好多唔同嘅智慧，希望可以令到你有所唔同，係咪啊？聽到之後有個共鳴，亦都可以可能你喺聽經嘅時候，可能你人生有啲咩嘅有迷失，係咪啊？不過 through 我哋即係嘅分享，都明白到原來我哋個個都會有我哋唔同嘅面對嘅困難，係咪有我哋嘅 struggle？ 你 you are not alone。咁啊，希望呢度咧，亦都可以 pay it forward to you， 係咪啊？嗱，如果我哋所咁多集裏邊咧嘅分享，你都有所共鳴嘅話咧，希望大家真係 like、subscribe and share 啦，同埋留多啲 comment 俾我哋啦，等我哋知道下一集又好，或者將來都好，我哋 Wise Struggle 應該點樣去 move it forward， 好唔好啊？好啦，咁啊呢一集咧就同大家去到呢一度咧，我哋就完結啦，好嘛？嗱，如果大家想認識我同 Angel 嘅話咧，好簡單嘅啫，記住 subscribe 我哋，咁啊同埋 follow 下我哋，咁你哋就會咧 follow 到我，亦都 follow 到 Angel 噶啦。嗱，最後一樣嘢大家唔知啊，其實 Angel 咧煮嘢食好叻噶吓 ，OK， 咁所以咧大家都去 follow 佢咧嘅 IG 係啦 ，OK， 咁本身我哋其實咧係想開個飲食 channel 嘅，係啦，咁啊希望下一次我哋都可以一齊煮下嘢食啊，係咪啊？係啦 ，One day definitely，OK， 咁好啦，呢度去到最後同大家講，拜拜。